This week, we got to the end of the road with Tom Taylor's Superman Son of Kal run, which got worldwide recognition, but still failed in the end. It did not sell. That's why it was canceled. And it's being rebooted, I guess, for a 6-issue miniseries, a pity miniseries, so Tom Taylor doesn't have to lose too much face on this. And here to talk to me about that is Jim from Weird Science. How you doing, Jim?
I'm doing great, Wes. Glad to be here and talk a little comics.
It's very funny. We get to this last issue, and Tom Taylor likes to act like his series didn't get canceled for low numbers and the sales weren't very good. But you can tell by this last issue and this Red Sin and all that stuff that he abruptly canceled this because he didn't know it was going to be ending at issue number 18.
Yeah, you could tell right away. He didn't. And it's a thing that he's been doing lately. He doesn't set up things as well as he should. So at a point, oh, my God, we're canceled. I better throw that out there. And then all of a sudden, Red Sin is just thrown at you in this last issue. And it really does feel rushed. It feels forced because it seems like this was canceled.
And it's clear because Tom Taylor went out there and made the rounds. He did multiple interviews. There's Tom Taylor Superman interviews out the wazoo this week talking about his run and how proud he is. But you can see he has no understanding on why this thing actually failed in the end. In fact, one of the headlines is John Kent's Adventures of Superman gets a rebrand for a reason DC won't talk about yet. They don't need to talk about it because we know what the reason is. Because everyone bailed on the series because the writing was piss poor and the pacing was even worse.
Yeah, and he had so many things he could have done. Now, the idea that John got aged up, that's not on Tom Taylor, that's on Bendis. But when you come in, you end up being able to define the character. This is a character, John Kent, that not many people can say we really know him because a lot of the stuff that happened ended up in a volcano on Earth 3 and never really got to get the full character. And while people are upset that, oh, a young John, we should have seen him struggle with his powers and things like that, you could have had that in Tom Taylor's run as well. He could have shown him being Superman for the first time and struggling, and he never did that. He seemed to just get caught up in the hype when you ended up having him come out as bisexual. And the book just seemed to focus on that. And he forgot to tell a story in the meantime. And that's a shame because you could have had a lot of struggle, which ends up making people endear themselves to a character.
Yeah, it's crazy. The relationship with Jay Nakamura ends up taking over the book. Really, it's a gay coming of age story rather than a superhero story. But he doesn't even realize that's one of the hindrances and one of the reasons people don't read it. This is what Tom Taylor said. We made global news last year when he and Jay kissed. And you know the importance of that? It seems simple that he's just kissing a guy on the couch. Yeah, but you can't underestimate the importance of Superman's symbol. And what that represents, and that the most powerful man on the planet is bisexual is huge. And actually, I genuinely love John and Jay's relationship. I love that they kissed in front of the entire world's media and all the cameras in their civilian identities. It's very nice that he loves that, and that's really the defining factor of his run, but it wasn't entertaining enough. It wasn't enough superheroics going on because it was all overtaken by the relationship itself. And in many ways, Jay Nakamura is the hero of the book, and John Kent is just a supporting character.
Yeah, and the big thing about this is that is a moment. That isn't a story. That isn't a run. That's a moment, and it's fine. But have a story around it to make it feel like it ended up being something important. In the book itself, John just immediately is the greatest thing ever. There's no struggle, and not even a struggle with the whole bisexuality deal. And so it became something that just didn't feel real. It just ended up feeling like a publicity stunt. And then when you go and have no story around that, it ends up really just fading. I think a lot of people who ended up jumping on the book, which there were some, we saw the sales then, they started going down again because you have to keep everybody involved with a story. And I really think that he dropped the ball on a lot of things in that book because he was then just centering on that moment instead of expanding it and instead of even setting it up.
Yeah, it doesn't even feel just like a Tom Taylor failure at this point. I think DC Comics don't understand why this didn't work as a superhero story.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that that's the big point here is it's something that they have been doing for the past couple of years. And I do think that there was some editorial, influence in this whole play. but most of these new characters, which we see people, clapping back against, some of them are good characters or could be good, but you never get to that stage. They're always right away the best thing ever. And the idea of John taking over for his father as Superman, I don't think anybody would be that against that if you would have seen the progression of it and maybe seen him struggle. We could then have empathy for John trying to fill his father's shoes. This is something that anybody probably has experienced in their lives, but yet he ended up where right away, John Kent better than Superman. And that ended up making you think really, this is bullcrap. It feels like it's forced. And that's one of the biggest disappointments I had in the series, is the idea that you never saw John really struggle. And that's something that I think could have went a long way, especially story-wise. And that could have even included coming out as bisexual, all that stuff all rolled up into one. But it never really got anywhere. It was a really boring, series where Tom Taylor even wanted to, fight almost with people online saying this Superman John Kenny's not going to punch anybody, and really, really went with that. And it just felt weird. It felt odd the whole time.
Yeah, he's been bragging for 2 years about how his Superman doesn't punch anyone. The problem is it's a Superman superhero comic book. That's kind of an expectation that comes with the genre. Once you do it for, 6 issues, it doesn't get over. People are walking away in droves, and yet you continuously do that, and to this day continue bragging about it. It's absolutely ridiculous. This is what he had to say in one of the interviews. He talks about this multiple times. We've seen his growth over those 18 issues, but we've also seen a Superman who isn't violent. In 18 issues, he punches one person, and that was an accident. But the fact that he's been the most powerful person on the planet, but also nonviolent, we've made him inspirational, and we've also tried to help him save people constantly. Yeah, but the problem is that it's boring. I don't take the story as being inspirational. I take it as being full of filler. They told 1 or 2 story arcs in 18 issues here, and he never fights anyone. He never overcomes. He beats Lex Luthor in chess in 5 seconds, which shouldn't happen anyway. And it's absolutely ridiculous that there was no action in the stories whatsoever. It's a Superman comic.
Yeah, exactly. And the play here, he tried to kind of meld in this idea that John Kent is so overpowered that he has to learn his strength. He's doing that and will continue doing it even in the Nightwing book with backups, the idea that he's training with Nightwing. And that's another thing, just as an aside, that Nightwing is John's be-all, end-all when your father's Superman, especially him coming back. But this is the problem. The ending up having this no training. You really should have went full into that of there's a John Kent who comes back from, being kidnapped by Ultraman, all that stuff. And he's just boom. And now he's Superman. There has to be some sort of little area where he's overwhelmed. And you just didn't get it. He ended up right away. His father says, I got to go away. Now, this is a kid who just comes back for himself, almost gone a decade, and now his father's going away again. He never dealt with that, but also went where John said, I'm better than you, you don't do enough. And it just felt weird all the time. And like you said, the big play is issue to issue. It got boring. Not much was happening. He ended up befriending murderers, but yet wouldn't punch a guy. But Tom Taylor doesn't talk about that because it's his revolutionaries from his Suicide Squad book. But he legitimately found out that they were terrorists and murderers and was fine with it, but yet he won't punch somebody. That doesn't work. It doesn't work overall.
Yeah, there's some other weird stuff. They actually set things up before the series starts. Because Superman and John Kent are traveling around, and he tells his dad, he's like, I've been to the future. I know that on this date particularly, you go away and you never come back. You disappear forever, and I'm going to end up being the Superman. So he kind of knows that it's going to be happening. Mm-hmm. And it's set up that when he goes to Warworld, Superman never returns. That apparently is the history that he knew when he was with the Legion of Superheroes. But this is what Tom Taylor says. It almost feels like it's a different character. He doesn't feel like he's ever going to replace his dad. But at the same time, he knows 100% that he has to step up and be the hero to the world that when the world needs it. He 100% knew that he was going to replace his dad because he knew his dad was going to go missing. What happened there? They didn't even tell a competent, coherent story. Did they change the future of the world or something?
It seems, I'm telling you, all this will be played off of Well, we did have a crisis between that. They end up trying to, meld things in and stuff like that. And I think some things did change. But the idea too, and as you were saying, that made me think of, you ended up where at the beginning of the run, you ended up seeing a little bit of people upset about John, but it was only you're helping immigrants and you're doing this. And there never was really a feel of if the world itself was really accepting of John, if they were against him. And you kind of just had him in this bubble, and it became the bubble of him and Jay Nakamura. And that's where we just went through the whole series, and you never ever felt, in my mind, reading it myself, I never really felt that John had taken the place of Kal-El. It was just a placeholder, and that's how it felt. And that was on the writing in my mind. That was all on that, because I never really felt like Tom Taylor really got the idea of what would make John Superman, except lip service and surface level stuff like that. So it really threw me off.
I imagine Tom Taylor sitting there and going, the only reason people didn't, fully embrace this and it didn't sell as well as other Superman comics in the past was because they're all homophobes. It's just because it came out as gay. But that is not why this failed. It failed because of 1,000 self-inflicted wounds, because it wasn't executed well. They forgot to tell superhero stories. They started stories and never completed them. It was just a boring read from beginning to end. It just so happens that in the middle, John Kemp came out as gay. They got worldwide exposure. They got a sales bump very briefly, and then the sales tanked once again because Tom Taylor blew it. This was his opportunity to take Brian Michael Bendis' John Kent Superman mess and take that chicken shit and make chicken salad out of it, and he actually made it worse.
Yeah, I agree. And it all comes down, again, to character work. And I think that the character work was really missing in this run, and you needed it because John is kind of a clean slate, especially coming back aged up. And like I said, the idea that people are against the aging up is one thing, but you had an opportunity to show people why it could work, why people should be interested in a older John. And then you just kind of got caught up in the hype, and I think really get caught up with fighting with a minority of people, even on social media or whatnot, to try to prove your point. But you're not here to prove a point. You're here to write a good story that would have lasted. If this sold, we would not have had it end. Yeah, we might have had it change a title, but it still is Superman, Son of Kal-El. You still could have Kal-El come back. You could figure that out. And yet it's not going to be around. We're going to have a mini series. It's because everybody who even jumped on with that bisexual announcement, I think a lot of them just ended up like, there's not much going on. I had my moment and let's move on here, because the book ended up not telling a story, not doing good character work overall, just kind of telling you, hey, he's great. This is him. Boom. And it was every issue over and over and over. And then at the end, oh my God, I better introduce this villain that I wanted to introduce before, but let's pretend that this wasn't canceled.
No other character in DC Comics got the headlines that were generated from John Kent coming out other than like Batman or something like this. He got everything you could have ever wanted from DC Comics in the media. He got worldwide exposure, not just in the comic book media, but mainstream media. He had DC Comics pushing his comic book harder than anything but Batman. And it still failed because he didn't do a good job on this. And he's still claiming it didn't get canceled. But we know behind the scenes, he threw a big fit and he got all pissed off about it. And he was absolutely blindsided because he didn't think it would get canceled.
Yeah. And I think that the big play here is you end up having that big wow moment. You said this is the moment where you have all the eyes on you. That's when you have to keep the people. Yeah, you get them in the door, but you have to have something to sell them then. And he didn't do it. And it's a shame, because I think you could have even had it, if you did it well, you could have had people who even went into it saying, oh, I'm going to see this train wreck. Oh my God, this is pretty good. And it didn't fail because of that deal. In fact, I bet you the sales actually had, we saw they had a bump right away, but some of them might have stayed, whatnot. But the people who are there for comic books, were not as hateful as a lot of people. There are some hateful people, but not as hateful as, oh, I'm going to drop this book because of this. A good story, good characters will keep people, will get more people, get buzz in. And the best I could say about the book, it was okay, but it didn't tell a story. And at the end, that's what ruins the deal. That's what a lot of Tom Taylor books, and I'm a fan of Tom Taylor overall, and I liked his Suicide Squad. book, but that didn't tell a story. And then ended up, and if you go back, he said that wasn't canceled either. Like these things keep ending in the middle of stories, but yet they're never canceled in his mind. And it's a shame because you really had, you had a setup to really define this character and really push him forward in a positive way. And it was nothing. You end up after this not really knowing much more about the character except the big wow moment.
Tom Taylor's been making an absolute fool of himself trying to argue with people on social media everywhere. He tried to claim that, his Superman Son of Kal was like one of the best-selling comic books in the industry, even though it was canceled. If you haven't seen this, I absolutely make this guy look like the jabroni that he is when I break it all down and create a million different holes in his stupid story. If you want to see Tom Taylor look as dumb as he really is, definitely check out this video. If you don't see it here, there's also a link in the video description.